They looked at his skin, not his badge, and that was the first mistake. The terminal at Reagan National was alive with the usual rush of a Thursday evening, all rolling carry-ons, overhead announcements, and the sharp white glow of airport lighting bouncing off polished floors. Gate screens flickered from on time to boarding soon. Children tugged at tired parents. And somewhere near the coffee stand a barista called out a name no one claimed. In the middle of all that movement, one man walked with the kind of calm that didn't ask for attention but seemed to part the noise around him anyway. Elijah Brooks wore a dark navy overcoat over a pressed charcoal suit, one hand wrapped around a slim leather folder, the other resting near the handle of a carry-on small enough for an overnight trip. He did not look rushed. He did not look lost. And maybe that was what bothered them most. Because in places like this, where authority lived behind counters, badges, and keypad doors, some men still believed they could tell who belonged just by looking. Elijah moved through the restricted corridor near Concourse C with measured steps, his face unreadable, his posture straight, his eyes quietly scanning every detail from the security cameras overhead to the nervous way a junior agent fumbled with a radio near the service entrance. He had been in louder places than this. Harder places too. Places where one wrong glance could cost lives. So the tension in the air now, thin and ugly and familiar, barely changed his breathing. But he noticed it. He always noticed it. The first voice came from behind him, loud enough to turn heads before the words even landed. "Sir, stop right there." Elijah paused. Not slowly, not dramatically, just enough to show he had heard. When he turned, 2 airport police officers were already closing the distance. One tall and broad with a jaw set tight, the other younger, trying a little too hard to look in control. Their boots tapped against the tile with the practiced rhythm of men used to making people nervous. The older one, Officer Ryan Cole, looked Elijah up and down with a stare that had already made up its mind. "That area is restricted," he said. "You got authorization for that access point?" Elijah met his eyes for exactly 1 second before answering. "Yes." Just that. One word, low and even. No attitude. No explanation. But Ryan Cole's expression hardened like calm itself had offended him. A few travelers slowed as they passed, sensing the shape of conflict before they understood it. A woman near the charging station lowered her phone. A businessman in a camel coat pretended not to stare. Overhead, the announcement for Flight 278 to Atlanta echoed through the concourse, cheerful and mechanical, almost mocking in its normalcy. "Let me see it," Cole said. Elijah glanced at the badge clipped inside his coat, then back at the officer. "You can verify through command," he replied. "That would be the correct procedure." The younger officer shifted. Cole didn't. Something ugly flashed behind his eyes then, something older than the moment, older than policy. He stepped closer, invading space he had not earned. "I said show me now." Elijah's grip tightened around the folder, not out of fear, but restraint. Around them, the terminals seemed to lean in. The cameras kept turning. The radios kept buzzing. And somewhere deep in the airport's hidden corridors, people with far more power than either officer had just started moving. Because the man they were trying to stop was not a trespasser, not a suspect, and not someone they could afford to misread. He was the reason half this airport was under review. And within minutes, every person in that terminal would understand exactly who had just been ordered to put his hands where everyone could see them. Elijah did not move. He stood beneath the cold airport lights with the same steady composure that had unsettled Officer Ryan Cole from the moment he turned around. Around them, Reagan National kept breathing in its usual rhythm, the rolling thunder of carry-on wheels, the soft chime of gate changes, the distant hiss of an espresso machine, all of it continuing as if nothing unusual was happening. But something had changed. People could feel it. The air near Concourse C had tightened into that strange public silence that comes when strangers sense a line is about to be crossed, and no one wants to be the first to speak. Ryan Cole extended one hand, palm out, not as a request, but as a display. "Bag down." "Folder 2. Elijah's eyes lowered for half a second to the hand, then rose again to the officer's face. "That folder contains protected material," he said. His voice remained controlled, almost quiet, but it carried in a way shouting never could. "You do not have clearance to handle it." The younger officer beside Cole glanced at the leather folder and then at Elijah, uncertainty flickering across his face. It was gone almost instantly, swallowed by the pressure of the moment and by the older man leading it. Cole gave a dry laugh that did not reach his eyes. "That is not your call," he said. "You walk into a restricted corridor. You do not get to decide what happens next." Elijah shifted his carry-on beside his leg and looked past them for a moment, toward the glass wall overlooking the tarmac. Beyond it, a jet was backing away from the gate, slow and deliberate, guided by wands and silence. He had always thought airports were honest in one way. Everything looked polished, scheduled, controlled. But underneath that order was judgment, instinct, improvisation, and sometimes the kind of arrogance that mistook uniform for wisdom. "I am giving you a chance to correct this," Elijah said. It was not a threat. That was what made it heavier. Cole stepped closer. "No, what you are doing is refusing a lawful order." A few feet away, a woman with a stroller stopped completely. Two college-age travelers near a charging station exchanged a look. A man in a Nationals cap lifted his phone just slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to record what might become something worth keeping. Elijah noticed all of it without seeming to notice anything. That was the discipline in him, the years of training his face to stay still while his mind mapped every exit, every camera, every voice, every choice. His thumb brushed once against the edge of the folder. Inside were reports, complaints, timestamps, witness statements, and 6 weeks of buried patterns no one at this airport had expected anyone important to take seriously. He had come in, quietly for a reason. He had wanted the truth without the performance. Now the performance had found him anyway. "Last time," Cole said, sharper now. "Put the folder down and place your hands where I can see them." Elijah turned his head just slightly as a radio on the younger officer's shoulder crackled alive, then cut out before a voice could fully form. Down the corridor, near the frosted glass doors marked operations, a woman in a slate gray suit had just stepped into view. Naomi Carter, Airport Operations Director. Her pace slowed the second she saw who was standing at the center of the scene. Her face did not change much, but it did not need to. In places built on hierarchy, real authority has a way of announcing itself without words. Elijah looked back at Cole. "Officer," he said, calm as ever, "you still think you are stopping the wrong man. What you do not understand is that you have just stopped the person every one of you should have been expecting." Naomi Carter stopped 3 yards from the officers, her heels fixed to the polished floor as if the entire terminal had suddenly tilted beneath her. She was not a woman who startled easily. In an airport this size, surprises came hourly and usually arrived with paperwork, whether delays or someone shouting at the wrong desk. But this was different. Her eyes moved from Elijah Brooks to the leather folder in his hand, then to Officer Ryan Cole, and in that brief silence her expression sharpened with the kind of realization that changes the temperature of a room. The younger officer noticed it first. His shoulders stiffened. His hand fell away from his radio. Ryan Cole did not notice because men like him rarely looked for warning signs in faces they assumed would fall in line. "Ma'am, step back," he said without turning fully toward her. "This is an active security matter." Naomi did not step back. She kept her gaze on Elijah for one long beat, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, and far more dangerous than raised volume would have been. "Officer Cole," she said, "do you have any idea who you are speaking to?" That question should have ended it. It should have cut through the performance right there. But pride has a way of making foolish men feel taller just before the floor gives out beneath them. Cole let out a humorless breath and squared his stance. "I know I am dealing with someone in a restricted zone refusing to comply." Elijah said nothing. He did not need to. He had seen this moment before in different uniforms, different buildings, different cities. The refusal to pause. The need to dominate before understanding. The instant a simple check of procedure becomes a public contest of ego. Around them, the crowd had grown by inches and glances. No one gathered outright, but more people slowed than passed. A little boy holding a soft pretzel stared openly from beside his mother's leg. A man in a pilot's jacket stopped near the gate window and pretended to read a message he had already read twice. From somewhere overhead came another boarding call, cheerful and detached, asking passengers for Charlotte to proceed to gate C-22. Normal life continued at full volume just outside the circle of humiliation tightening around one man who had done nothing wrong. Naomi stepped forward now, just enough for Cole to finally face her. You need to end this, she said. Now. Cole frowned, irritated rather than alarmed. With respect, Director Carter, airport operations does not override law enforcement. Naomi almost answered, but Elijah spoke first. No, he said, calm as ever. It does not. Cole gave a small nod, mistaking that for support. Then Elijah continued. But command authority does. The words landed softly, yet the effect was immediate. The younger officer blinked. Naomi drew in a quiet breath. Somewhere down the corridor behind the frosted glass doors, rapid footsteps were approaching. Elijah lowered the folder at his side just an inch, not surrendering it, only easing the weight in his hand. You were told to verify through command, he said to Cole. Instead, you chose spectacle. For the first time, something uncertain moved behind Cole's eyes. Not fear yet, but the first crack in certainty. He looked at the badge inside Elijah's coat again, longer this time, as if maybe the details would reveal themselves if he stared hard. Enough. The insignia was understated. The lettering was not designed for distance. That was intentional. Men who truly carried authority did not need it printed larger. The footsteps grew louder. 2 senior airport officials appeared first, both tense, both moving with the urgency of people who knew they were already late. Behind them came a tall, silver-haired man in a dark federal overcoat, his presence pulling the attention of everyone nearby before he even spoke. Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett did not raise his voice. He did not flash a badge dramatically. He simply looked at Elijah, then at Ryan Cole, and said, Officer, explain to me why Commander Elijah Brooks is being detained in the middle of my airport. The question dropped into the terminal like a stone into still water. The ripples hit every face at once. The younger officer went pale. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second as though the damage she feared had just become official. And Ryan Cole, who had spent the last several minutes trying to prove that Elijah did not belong, suddenly looked like a man realizing he had just blocked the door for the person who owned the building. For one suspended second, no one in the terminal seemed to breathe. Ryan Cole stood frozen beneath the cold fluorescent lights, his mouth parting slightly, as if some explanation might still arrive in time to save him from what had just happened. It did not. Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett stepped fully into the circle of attention with the quiet authority of a man who had spent years watching lesser men mistake noise for power. His coat hung straight, his silver hair perfectly in place, and yet there was nothing polished about the look in his eyes now. It was sharp, disappointed. Final. Answer the question, Bennett said. Ryan swallowed. The younger officer beside him took half a step back, instinctively creating distance from the scene as if embarrassment itself were contagious. Naomi Carter remained still, but her hands were now clasped tightly in front of her, the only sign that she understood just how public and irreversible this moment had become. Around them, strangers pretended not to stare while staring. Anyway, the airport had that strange hush again, the one that falls over a place built for motion when something human and ugly stops everyone in their tracks. Ryan found his voice, but it came out thinner than before. Sir, he entered a restricted corridor and refused to present credentials on command. Bennett looked at Elijah, then back to Ryan. On command, he repeated, not like a question, but like he was placing the words under a microscope. Elijah did not interrupt. He simply stood there with the same controlled stillness, the same leather folder in his hand, the same unreadable expression that had unsettled them from the start. Bennett took one step closer to Ryan. Commander Brooks instructed you to verify through command channels, which is the exact protocol for his level of clearance. So I will ask you again, Officer Cole, why is Commander Elijah Brooks being detained in the middle of my airport? The word commander hit harder the second time, not because it was louder, but because now there was no room left to pretend anyone had misheard it. A woman near the gate lowered her phone slowly, her eyes widening. The pilot by the window finally stopped pretending to check his messages. Even the younger officer seemed to shrink inside his uniform. Ryan glanced at Elijah's badge one more time, but it was too late for details now. The problem was no longer what he had failed to verify. The problem was what he had chosen to assume. Sir, I believe there was a security concern, Ryan said carefully, each word sounding like it had to squeeze past his pride to get out. Bennett's face did not soften. No, he said. You believe there was a man you could challenge in public without consequence. The words landed with a force no raised voice could have matched. Elijah looked toward the glass wall for a moment, where blinking runway lights reflected faintly against the terminal windows like distant signals no one had bothered to decode. He had seen this before too. The way truth arrives quietly, and yet somehow leaves devastation behind it anyway. Naomi finally spoke, her tone measured but firm. The corridor Commander Brooks entered was pre-cleared an hour ago, through federal coordination. Operations received the notice at 4:12 p.m. I signed off on it myself. Ryan turned toward her, then toward Bennett, then back to Elijah, as though he were still searching for one person in the room willing to tell him this could be walked back. But there are moments that do not reverse. Moments when the spotlight of consequence clicks on and stays there. Bennett extended his hand toward Elijah. Commander, your credentials. Elijah opened his coat with one smooth motion and presented the identification wallet clipped inside. Bennett barely glanced at it before closing it again and handing it back with visible respect. That small gesture changed everything. Not because it revealed new information, but because it showed every witness exactly where authority had always been standing. Elijah tucked the credentials away and finally spoke, his voice even, low, and impossible to ignore. This airport has received 12 profiling complaints in 6 weeks, he said. 9 of them involved black travelers or personnel. 4 were buried. 2 were rewritten. 1 of them involved an officer in this terminal. Ryan's face lost what little color it had left. The younger officer stared at the floor. Naomi looked away, ashamed now not only of what had happened in public, but of how much had clearly been happening long before this. Elijah held Ryan's gaze without anger, which somehow made it worse. I came here to examine a pattern, he said. You made yourself the evidence. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with realization, with shifting eyes, with the sound of people quietly rethinking what they had just witnessed. A few travelers began moving again, slowly at first, but no one truly left the scene behind. Human beings have a way of lingering near the moment power changes hands, especially when they had just watched it used so carelessly. Elijah Brooks stood at the center of it all without triumph in his face, without anger in his voice, without any of the theater Ryan Cole had expected from a man publicly challenged and then publicly vindicated. That was the part Ryan could not understand. He had built his authority on reaction, on pressure, on making other people feel smaller so he could feel certain of his place. But Elijah did not shrink, and he did not perform. He simply remained exactly who he had been from the start. Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett turned toward Naomi Carter. Locked down all relevant footage from Concourse C, including corridor access, body camera records, and radio traffic from the last 30 minutes. Naomi nodded immediately, already in motion. Bennett then looked to the younger officer, whose face had gone pale enough to make even the airport lighting seem warm. Name: Officer Mason Reed, sir. Officer Reed, you will surrender your body camera for review and remain available for formal statement. Mason swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Ryan stared straight ahead, as if keeping his chin up might still preserve some fragment of the image he had been living inside all these years. But the image was gone now. It had cracked the moment Elijah spoke the word protocol, and Ryan chose pride over procedure. Elijah shifted the leather folder from one hand to the other and finally opened it. The movement was small, controlled, almost ordinary, but every person still standing within earshot watched it like the opening of a verdict. Inside were neatly tabbed reports, clean pages marked by dates, times, gate numbers, names, complaint summaries, review notes, and internal routing histories. Not rumors, not impressions, records, the kind that do not tremble just because the people in them do. Elijah removed one page and handed it first to Bennett, then another to Naomi. Complaint 7, he said. Passenger flagged near gate C19. No contraband found. Full apology never issued. Complaint 9. Contract employee stopped twice in one shift because her badge photo was called suspicious. Complaint 11. Black pilot questioned in front of passengers after presenting valid credentials. Naomi looked at the pages, her expression tightening with each line. These were rerouted, she said quietly. They never came through my office. Elijah looked at her, not accusingly, just steadily. That is part of why I am here. The words landed with a different kind of weight. Now, not dramatic, not explosive, worse, precise. Ryan finally spoke, but the confidence was gone. Sir, if there has been a misunderstanding, I am willing to clarify my actions. Elijah turned to him then, and the terminal seemed to narrow around that moment. A misunderstanding happens when facts are unclear, Elijah said. This was not that. You were given a lawful path to verify identity. You rejected it because your assumption mattered more to you than the process. Ryan opened his mouth, then stopped. What defense was left when the truth was that simple? Behind the glass wall, another plane eased across the tarmac under the blue edge of dusk, its lights blinking steadily against the deepening sky. The whole airport suddenly felt like a machine exposing its own hidden gears. The announcements, the checkpoints, the uniforms, the restricted doors, all of it built to promise order. And yet order without fairness had never been order at all. It was just control wearing better clothes. Bennett folded the report in his hand and looked directly at Ryan Cole. You are relieved from active duty pending immediate internal review. The words were calm, but they cut through the terminal with perfect clarity. A woman near the gate let out a breath she had clearly been holding. Mason lowered his head. Naomi closed the folder in her hands as though it carried more than paper inside it, as though it held the cost of every time someone had trusted the system and been answered with suspicion instead. Elijah said nothing for a long second. Then he looked at Ryan with something far heavier than satisfaction. Disappointment. The badge was supposed to help you see people more clearly, he said, not make you blind. Ryan Cole did not argue. That was the first thing everyone noticed. A man who had filled the terminal with certainty just minutes earlier now stood in the same uniform with none of the force left in him, as if the truth had reached inside and removed the part of him that always believed he would be protected from consequence. He unclipped his body camera with slow fingers and placed it in Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett's waiting hand. The small device looked ordinary, almost forgettable, but everyone standing there understood what it carried now. Not just footage. Proof. Elijah Brooks watched in silence, the leather folder tucked under his arm once more, his expression composed in that same steady way that had unsettled the officers from the beginning. Around them, the terminal resumed its movement by degrees. Travelers pulled bags. A child cried near the escalator. A gate agent called for Zone 3 boarding. But even as life continued, there was a new awareness in the air, as though the airport itself had just been forced to look into a mirror and could not unsee what stared back. Naomi Carter stepped closer to Elijah, her voice lowered now, stripped of the authority she usually wore like a second suit. Commander Brooks, I should have caught this sooner. Elijah looked at her for a moment, measuring not her title but her honesty. You were not supposed to catch a rumor, he said. You were supposed to catch a pattern. Patterns only matter when someone is willing to believe the people reporting them. Naomi lowered her eyes. That sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Because buried under the forms, the rerouted complaints, the quiet delays and administrative language was something simpler and uglier. People had spoken. The system had decided not to hear them. Officer Mason Reed stood a few feet away, uncertain what to do with his hands now that they were no longer resting near authority. He looked younger suddenly, less like a man in control and more like someone who had just understood how easily fear and loyalty can turn into complicity. Sir, he said, his voice tight. I should have said something sooner. Elijah turned toward him. Yes, he said. Not cruelly. Not dramatically. Just truthfully. Mason nodded once, shame moving across his face in a way that suggested the lesson might actually stay with him. Ryan still had not spoken. He stared past the crowd toward the long stretch of glass overlooking the runway, where aircraft lights blinked against the darkening evening like signals sent from a world more orderly than this one. Bennett noticed. Officer Cole, he said, you will report to Internal Affairs at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Full statement. No delays. Ryan finally answered, but the confidence was gone. Yes, sir. It was strange how small his voice sounded now. Strange how quickly command can vanish when it turns out it was never built on character to begin with. Elijah adjusted the cuff of his coat and glanced down at the folder again. Inside were more than complaints. There were names of officers, training records, missed interventions, recommendations that had been ignored because addressing them would have required uncomfortable honesty from comfortable people. He had not come here looking for spectacle. He had come because 6 weeks of reports had begun to sound less like isolated incidents and more like a culture hiding behind procedure. Tonight had confirmed it. Not because Ryan Cole was uniquely cruel. That would have been easier. No, the deeper problem was how normal this had become. How quickly a black man in the wrong hallway could be treated like a threat, even when he carried the very authority they claimed to respect. A boarding chime sounded overhead, bright and indifferent. Elijah exhaled slowly. For the first time since the confrontation began, his face softened, but only slightly, and only with the weight of memory. Years ago, he had watched his younger brother be pulled aside in another public place, not because of what he had done, but because someone decided his presence required explanation. His brother had laughed it off afterward. Elijah never had. Some lessons do not leave bruises. They leave vigilance. Naomi noticed the shift in his expression. "This is not just about tonight, is it?" she asked quietly. Elijah met her eyes. "It never is," he said. Then he looked back toward Ryan, toward Mason, toward the cameras still turning above the corridor, recording everything without judgment and without mercy. "People think these moments begin when someone raises their voice," he said. "They do not. They begin earlier. In what gets assumed, in who gets doubted, in which face gets read as a problem before a word is even spoken." No one answered because no one could. The truth had settled too deeply now. And in the cold white light of the terminal, with the runway glowing beyond the glass and the crowd slowly dispersing around them, it became clear that what had happened here was bigger than one officer making one bad call. It was a system exposing itself in public, one assumption at a time. Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett checked his watch, then looked toward the operations corridor where 2 additional federal staff members had just arrived carrying sealed evidence envelopes and a slim black case for digital intake. The scene was no longer a public misunderstanding. It had become an official record. The difference mattered. Elijah Brooks knew it, Naomi Carter knew it, and judging by the way Ryan Cole kept swallowing without speaking, he knew it too. The crowd had thinned but not vanished. Airports teach people to keep moving. Yet moments like this hold the eye longer than any departure board ever could. A few travelers still lingered near the gate windows, pretending to check flight updates while listening for every word. A gate agent whispered something to a colleague. A flight attendant passing through the concourse slowed just enough to understand that whatever had happened here was not over. Elijah stood with the same calm reserve, but now there was a quiet shift in the balance around him. No one questioned his place anymore. No one asked him to explain why he was there. The room had finally caught up to the truth he had been carrying from the start. Bennett handed the body camera to one of the federal staff members and turned to Naomi. "I want access logs from every restricted corridor on this side of the terminal for the past 60 days. Badge scans, overrides, denials, everything." Naomi nodded. "You will have them tonight." Then Bennett faced Elijah. "Commander, do you want to continue the inspection now or move to a private room?" Elijah glanced around the terminal, at the polished floor, the overhead signs, the travelers who had unknowingly become witnesses to a culture exposing itself in real time. "No," he said. "We continue here for 2 more minutes." Ryan lifted his eyes slightly at that, and for the first time there was something close to fear in them. Not fear of punishment alone, but fear of being seen clearly. Elijah opened the folder again and drew out a final sheet, this one marked not by complaints, but by organizational structure. He handed it to Bennett, who looked down and exhaled through his nose. Naomi leaned in and read the heading. Her face tightened. It was the chain of command for the Joint Oversight Operation, dated that morning, signed and activated at 11:40 a.m. Elijah's name sat at the top. Not as an observer, not as a visitor, as commanding officer. Beneath it were the names of every coordinating department, including airport police. Ryan stared at the page as if the paper itself had betrayed him. "You command the whole task force?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Elijah looked at him with neither pride nor cruelty. "Yes," he said, "including the officers assigned to this terminal." That was the second reveal, and it landed even harder than the first. Mason Reed closed his eyes for a moment. Naomi straightened slowly, absorbing the full weight of what Ryan had done. It was not just that he had challenged a superior officer. It was that he had singled out the one man in the airport with the highest operational authority over the very system Ryan believed he understood. Elijah let the silence sit there because silence, used well, can do what shouting never can. Then he spoke again, and his voice was steady enough to make every word feel carved from stone. "I did not come here to embarrass anyone," he said. "I came here because oversight means nothing if the people with the most power are never tested by the rules they enforce on others." Bennett folded the chain of command sheet once and placed it back into the folder with unusual care. "That is now beyond dispute," he said. Ryan looked down at his own hands as if they no longer belonged to the image he had built around himself. His badge was still clipped to his chest, but it no longer seemed like a symbol of power. It looked like a question. Naomi broke the silence next, her voice quiet with shame. "How many times has this happened before, and no one important was standing there?" No one answered right away because the answer lived in every complaint form, every delayed memo, every swallowed apology, and every traveler who left an airport carrying humiliation instead of help. Elijah finally turned toward the broad glass wall overlooking the runway, where the night had settled in fully now and aircraft lights moved like distant promises through the dark. "Too many," he said. "That is why I am not here as a guest. I am here to end it." The terminal lights had taken on that late evening sheen that makes every surface look colder than it is. Beyond the glass, runway lights stretched into the darkness in neat lines of blue and white, and aircraft moved like disciplined shadows under the control of towers no passenger ever saw. Inside Concourse C, the air felt different now. The public tension had not vanished, but it had matured into something heavier. Accountability. The kind that does not shout. The kind that arrives with sealed envelopes, official signatures, and witnesses who can never again say they did not know. Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett gave a brief nod to the federal intake team, and the process moved forward with quiet efficiency. Ryan Cole's body camera was logged. Mason Reed's was taken next. Radio traffic was copied. Access requests were frozen. A supervisor from airport police arrived at a near jog, then slowed the instant Naomi Carter handed him the first page of Elijah Brooks's inspection file. He read only the heading before his posture changed. There was no confusion left now, only consequence. Elijah stood near the gate window with the leather folder resting lightly against his side, his reflection faint in the dark glass behind him. He looked less like a man enjoying vindication and more like someone carrying the weight of being proven right too often. Naomi watched him for a moment before speaking. "You knew this would happen tonight, did not you?" Elijah kept his eyes on the runway. "I knew something would happen," he said. "Not because I expected one officer to lose control. Because systems do not hide patterns for 6 weeks unless the pattern is protecting someone." Naomi absorbed that in silence. A nearby boarding door opened with a soft hydraulic sound, then closed again, letting in a draft of cold night air and jet fuel before sealing the terminal back into its climate-controlled calm. Ryan stood a few feet away, no longer central, no longer commanding anything. Without the force of his posture and the certainty in his voice, he looked almost ordinary. That was the uncomfortable truth of men like him. They rarely looked dangerous in hindsight. They looked familiar. Bennett turned to the arriving airport police supervisor, Captain Lyle Mercer, and handed over a single-page directive. "Officer Ryan Cole is suspended pending full investigation. Officer Mason Reed is removed from field assignment until review is complete. Effective immediately." Mercer read the page once, then again, his jaw tightening. "Understood." Ryan's head lifted. "Captain, I would like the opportunity to explain." Mercer looked at him for a long second, then at the gathered witnesses, the federal intake team, the deputy commissioner, the operations director, and finally Elijah Brooks. "You already did explain," Mercer said. "You explained with your choices." That hit harder than the suspension itself. Ryan's shoulders lowered by half an inch, but in moments like this, half an inch is a collapse. Mason Reed said nothing at all. He stood with his eyes down, as though shame had finally done what policy never could and forced him to examine the cost of silence. Elijah turned from the window and faced them both. He did not step closer. He did not need to. "This review is not about one embarrassing incident," he said. "It is about what your decisions reveal when no one believes the person in front of them has the power to answer back." The words settled over the small group like dust over polished steel. Clear. Unavoidable. Naomi folded her arms tightly, not out of defensiveness now, but out of the effort it took to stand inside a truth that implicated more than one officer. "What happens next?" she asked. Elijah opened the folder one last time, and removed a stapled packet marked with color tabs. Next, every profiling complaint from the last 60 days gets reopened. Every restricted corridor stop gets reviewed against procedure. Every officer with repeated flags gets examined for escalation, bias, and supervisory failure. He handed the packet to Bennett, then another to Mercer. And every person whose complaint was buried gets a written response from this airport. Mercer nodded slowly, the full scale of that settling onto him like a load he had not expected to carry tonight. Bennett looked toward the corridor cameras still turning overhead. "The operation continues," he said. Elijah met his gaze and answered with the same calm certainty he had carried from the first moment Ryan Cole told him to stop. "No," he said. "Now it begins." And in the cold white glow of the terminal, with the runway lights burning steady beyond the glass and the illusion of unquestioned authority lying in pieces behind them, everyone standing there understood the same thing at once. The man they had treated like he did not belong had not just outranked them. He had come to measure the character of the entire system. And the system, in front of strangers, cameras, and its own leadership, had just answered. For a while, no one moved. The airport kept humming around them, faithful to its schedules, its screens, its polished illusion of order, but inside that small stretch of Concourse C, something deeper had shifted. It was there in the lowered eyes of Officer Mason Reed, in the hollow stillness of Ryan Cole, in the tight expression Naomi Carter could no longer hide, and in the quiet precision with which federal staff sealed evidence that should never have existed in the first place. Elijah Brooks stood at the center of it with no sign of victory on his face. That was what made the moment unforgettable. He had every reason to enjoy the reversal, every right to let the humiliation fall back on the men who had tried to force it on him, yet he did not. He carried himself the way he had from the beginning, steady, disciplined, unwilling to let another man's failure define his own dignity. Deputy Commissioner Harold Bennett finished signing the first transfer form and handed it to Captain Lyle Mercer, who took it with both hands and the grave expression of someone inheriting a problem far larger than tonight. The reopened. "Cases begin at 0600 tomorrow," Bennett said. Mercer nodded once. "My unit will cooperate fully." Naomi looked at Elijah, and this time there was no distance left in her voice. "Commander, I want the names of every person whose complaint was buried. I will answer them personally." Elijah studied her for a moment, making sure the promise had weight behind it. Then he gave a slight nod. "That matters," he said. "Not because it fixes what happened, because it tells them they were not invisible." The words hung there with a force that went beyond the airport, beyond the corridor, beyond the uniforms and the reports and the cameras overhead. Invisible. That was always the wound beneath the paperwork. Not just being doubted, not just being stopped, being made to feel like your account of reality could be filed away, rewritten, delayed, or erased because the system trusted its own instincts more than your truth. Ryan Cole finally raised his head. His face looked older now, not with time, but with the sudden collapse of certainty. "Commander Brooks," he said, his voice rough and unsteady, "I was wrong." No one rushed to rescue him from the weight of saying it. No one softened the air. The apology stood there on its own, thinner than the damage behind it, but real enough to be heard. Elijah faced him fully. "Yes," he said. Then, after a pause that made every person nearby listen harder, he added, "But wrong is where accountability starts, not where it ends." Ryan lowered his eyes again. There was nothing else to say. Some lessons do not need more words. They need witnesses. A final boarding call sounded for the last flight out to Atlanta, bright and indifferent, followed by the soft rolling chorus of suitcases across tile as travelers resumed the business of leaving. The crowd that had lingered near the gate windows finally began to disperse in earnest, but they did not leave unchanged. They had seen something rare in a public place. Not just a man in authority exposed, not just a chain of command reversed. They had seen calm defeat arrogance. They had seen procedure uncover prejudice. They had seen a black man stand inside a storm of suspicion and never once surrender the dignity others tried to take from him. Elijah turned toward the runway windows one last time. Outside, a plane lifted into the dark, its lights rising above the city like a promise that some things can still leave the ground clean. He thought of the complaints waiting in files, of the voices buried under administrative language, of the people who had walked away from this airport carrying shame that never belonged to them. Tonight would not erase any of that. Justice rarely arrives all at once. It comes in records reopened, in lies exposed, in systems forced to hear what they once ignored. Bennett stepped beside him. "You were right to come in quietly," he said. Elijah kept his eyes on the night beyond the glass. "No," he answered softly. "I was right to come at all." Then he turned, collected the leather folder from beneath his arm, and walked toward the operations corridor without looking back. No escort, no announcement, no need. The path ahead had already cleared itself. Behind him, the terminal lights shone cold and white over uniforms, reports, and faces suddenly stripped of illusion. And in that airport, on that ordinary Thursday night, one truth settled over everything else with the weight of final judgment. They thought the badge gave them power. They forgot that power without justice is only fear wearing a uniform.